um, districts, other offices, collaborating on curriculum, working with other content areas. And while I loved that for a couple years, I really missed the professional development and the people and the students. So I decided to take a year of professional leave, and I did some work for WIDA for a while with traveling and training for them, and then started English Learner Portal of my own. So it's been a couple years doing this, and I love, love it. And I especially love that you all are joining me this evening because I know you're spending so much time on screens. So the fact that you have agreed to spend another hour or so of screen time with us this evening means a lot to me. We are recording this session, so don't worry about frantic note-taking or writing everything down. The recording will be available. Once the session's over, if you've recorded Zoom sessions before, you know, it takes a few minutes to process, and then we'll do a little editing and then upload it to our website at the same page where you registered. We will send you an email. If you are subscribed to the email, you'll get the email with the link. It will have the recording of the video. It will also have a PDF of the slides and another PDF handout that we're going to talk about with strategies that I want to share with you. So all of that will be available. I know that some folks who are registered are not subscribed to the mail list or chose not to subscribe, which is absolutely your choice. But if that's the case in our system, you won't get the email. So if you later this evening, tomorrow morning, go back to that registration page, go to EnglishLearnerPortal.com, up in the header where the links are, click on webinars and follow your way to where you signed up for this webinar, and you'll see all of those downloads there. All right, so that takes care of our business part of the day. So let's talk about what we're doing in this webinar. So we're talking about language of math and making math accessible, because most of the time when we think of ESL, we automatically think of language arts. So of course, ESL is about language. Language arts comes to mind. But over the past 10 years or so, there's really been a shift with acknowledging that language is a part of every content area. And so there are now standards for language development, for English language development, that involve all of the content areas, language arts, math, science, social studies. All of us are involved in language development. The biggest stretch I found in working with teachers and administrators was figuring out how that works in math. Right? Math and you know, the math world and the language world are different kinds of brains. So it's a struggle sometimes to figure out how those all work together. So we will talk about equity and language and math. We'll talk about how to systematically address language in your math lessons. Now, this is true whether you're the ESL teacher, paraeducator, if you are the math teacher, whatever your role is, we all can play a part in developing language and math understanding simultaneously. That's our goal. We're not doing a language part and then teaching a math part. We're doing this all smushed together, seamless integration there. That's our goal anyway. And then I'm going to go through, I know we're always looking for new strategies. We don't have much time tonight, but I'll share a few of the ones that are the first ones that I share with teachers when we get together, and we'll go through those. It's going to be a bit of a speed session to get all of this in. So hang in there, and remember, if you miss something or it goes too fast, you'll get the recording, and I'm always available by email if you have questions after. So taking a minute and looking at things from the mathematics side. As an ESL person, I always look at things from the language development standards part. But over the years, especially as a district coordinator and assistant principal, I really had to learn how to look at language from the content teacher side, because it's my world. Just like I couldn't walk into the classroom and do a great job at teaching math, I could get by. I could study enough the day before to make it happen the next day, but I would not be an expert in any way and wouldn't do it justice. And so we can't expect math teachers, science teachers, anyone else to automatically know what to do with language. Up until just a few years ago, there wasn't really widespread recognition that language was part of math, even though common sense or, your gut tells you there's something different, for English learners when they're in the math class. So in 2014, as you see on the slide, the National Council of Teachers of Mathematics put out a position statement paper. And this was a huge deal in both worlds, in the math world and especially in the English language development world, because we were recognized as being an important part of math. So this little clip here is part of their statement. There is a full handout. Actually, I will put that for you to download the whole position paper. It's only like a page and a half that you will be able to read as well. So I'll make that available for download. It's a great read. It's great to share with others. So I'll give you just a minute to look through this. I won't read it to you, but I'll give you a minute to look through and get the gist. So the things that stood out to me in this, which you'll see that I've underlined on the slide, is that the National Council of Teachers of Mathematics, right, major leaders in the world of teaching mathematics, understand that making math accessible to all students means that we are responsive to backgrounds, experiences, culture, traditions, language being part of that. We're being responsive. So tonight, what we talk about, these strategies and ideas and things that we can do to be more responsive to the differences in the classroom. And we have to acknowledge and address the factors that contribute to different levels of success and different outcomes. We tend to see in our data of English learners lagging behind native English speakers in math and in other areas, but we're talking about math tonight. So we really have to get past that old belief that, oh, math is universal, it's numbers, everybody uses numbers, it's all the same, adding is adding. Math isn't like that anymore. So we really have to dig in and look at what factors are contributing to these differences in levels of success in math for different subgroups. So what would you consider to be the biggest obstacle for English learners in math instruction? What have you noticed? What have you witnessed? What do you see in classrooms day to day? If you can put your first thoughts in the chat box, I'd love to get some input from you. What do you consider to be the biggest obstacles for English learners in math instruction? That's great. Awesome vocabulary, word problems, expressing their answers. Oh, I see a couple names I recognize. It's nice to have people come back and visit who we've had in classes or other webinars. Welcome back. All right, so vocabulary is definitely a repeat here. The terminology, but just overall comprehension, understanding the concepts, understanding what the teacher is saying to explain to them, and then also expressing their answers. Those are the three big categories I see so far. right? The academic language of it. So that's definitely what we are going to be talking about. Thank you so much for adding those in there. Right, lots of great ideas. Feel free to keep adding in as you think of them, because we definitely use that information to consider what we present next time to see what else we could address. So it really, the big picture boils down to three big areas. Well, the overarching is that academic language, the gap in academic language, whether it be reading a problem or the vocabulary involved, expressing your thinking, being able to explain yourself verbally or in writing, understanding, being able to comprehend the instruction, the academic language that's coming at me, to the receptive language. So all of that involves language that we have to get through first to be able to get to the math, because then the math can have its own challenges in itself of, us understanding and being able to comprehend that. So it sounds like we are all on the same page. And I see what Sarah wrote, that oftentimes we feel that math is a weakness for a student, but really it's the language, and math could be a strength. We have students who are great with their mathematical thinking. We just don't know that because they're not getting access. They're not able to express themselves. So what are some quick things we can do about that? If you've ever taken a course with English Learner Portal, you have probably heard about the 3 principles of accessible lesson planning, or what we often refer to as the triangle. Whenever we're working with teachers, we want to not add a lot of new things to your plate. Most of what you need to do for English learners, you're already doing. It's just a matter of doing it a little more often, or tweaking it a little, or being a bit more intentional about what you're doing, and really thinking ahead of how to get the biggest bang for the buck out of the things you're already doing. So the 3 principles of accessible lesson planning, this is where we start our coaching from the very beginning. All teachers, whatever you teach, not just math, 3 principles to be included in every lesson. And I know that sounds overwhelming, but as we talk through it, you'll hear that you probably are already doing these things. We're just going to get more intentional and explicit about it. So the number one biggest bang for your buck, if I could say the closest to a silver bullet for helping English learners in any classroom, would be interaction. It is so valuable for English learners, and I would argue all students. I mean, I do believe this is true for all students, to be engaged in conversation around math, around whatever the content is. You must use the language to learn the language. You must practice the language to get comfortable and to be able to really master it and get to that academic level. We want to find ways to be really purposeful and explicit in our interaction. You're already doing a lot of this, I'm sure. You do think, pair, share, you do turn and talk, you do small group work, collaborative learning, maybe group problem solving. All of those are exactly what I'm talking about. And just understand now that the value you place on that time in your lesson plan gets ratcheted up from being a good thing to do to being a crucial thing to do. And yes, we have so much to cover in our curriculum and get through, but the time you spend with student interaction is going to be time well spent, because it will save you from clarifying and reteaching things over and over as time goes by. Comprehensibility is our second factor, pretty much a survival method, but the same thing. You do a lot of this already, just now we're moving it to the crucial must-have level. Those visuals, pictures to go with the vocabulary, hands-on, manipulatives, modeling, videos, anything you can do to bring the information to students in multisensory ways. We always say in teaching, most things come in threes. So we have the three principles, we have a lot of threes. I also go by the three ways of presentation. If you want students to remember it, you want to say it, right? They have to hear it, they have to see it, and they have to use it. So if it's a new vocabulary word, I need to hear you say it as the teacher. I need to see something that's going to make another connection for me, a picture or a drawing, and then I need to say it. If it's an explanation, we do a lot of repeating. So just kind of keep that set of three in your mind. Hear it, see it, say it. Hear it, see it, say it. We have to at least get that in, and the more you repeat it, the better. The last part of the three principles is the critical thinking. And our rule across the board is we try very, very hard to not water down the content. It's easy to fall into that trap. It's what a kind heart wants to do for a student who's struggling to get through. But we really want to stay focused on the grade level expectation and add in those scaffolds and supports, add in interaction, add in more comprehensibility strategies, add in more repetition so that students can wrap their heads around age-appropriate outcomes and standards instead of going backwards and watering down. Now, I know I'm flying through all this, and we could go so deep and spend hours in each one of these categories. But for right now, if you just focus on keeping that level of thinking, grade level appropriate, and adding in consistent, reliable interaction and comprehensibility, and then hear it, see it, say it, right? These are your tips so far. That's where we are. Now, I'm going to go through a couple strategies that address the three principles. One way we can build in more interaction is by using strategies such as the talk moves. Now, I started using this text by Suzanne Chapin and Catherine O'Connor. I don't know what version they're on now, but it's been a while. Like, this is not a new strategy, but if you look up the Talk Moves book, they have videos, they have examples, they have models, they have all kinds of strategies. I'm going to summarize in like the next 2-3 minutes everything that they have in the book. So, you know, it's like the quick version. To get students more engaged in interaction, sometimes they just don't know, right? We tell them turn and talk. We say, you know, share with a partner, and it kind of falls flat. Or when we're doing teacher-student, like asking questions and getting answers in whole group, our discussions aren't always that rich. So how can we beef it up? And every strategy that I use with students, I like to make sure they know that that's a strategy that I'm using. So when I talk about talk moves, I use them in the classroom, and then I point them out to the students and then teach the students how to use them with each other. So we can enrich our whole group lesson by me facilitating the talk moves, or sometimes them with each other. And then when they go to small groups or partner talk, it's always a challenge to say, I want to, when you're working with your partner, when you're talking about this problem, I want to hear some talk moves. Now, of course, we'd introduce them one at a time with lots of modeling and practice, which you could see, you know, from the videos and such with the text. The first one being revoicing. Very simple. I'm sure you already do it, but just pointing out the value of it helps, I guess, justify and remind us to keep doing those things, or be aware when we're doing it. Especially with English learners, revoicing is super, because It's repetition, and they can hear the language of math over and over with reworded a little bit differently. So a student gives an answer, you ask a question, student gives a response, and you say, so you're saying that, and you kind of summarize what they said. Do I have that right? So not only are you reinforcing or justifying that student, making them feel good about their answer, you're also saying it another way. You might add in a little clarification. You might add in more academic vocabulary when you revoice it. Let's say someone says, I plus one plus one. You're like, oh, so you're saying that you used addition, and you used addition to say 1 plus 1. And they'll be like, yes, of course, that's what I said. And so you've reinforced them, but you've also raised the academic level of the conversation. Okay. This repeating, this is the age-old teacher repeating, sometimes used for management, but it's great for concept development and language development as well. Now, can you restate or rephrase what I just said? So I explained something and I turned to the student A. Could you restate what I just said? Could you explain that as well? Or maybe a student to student, could you explain what student B just said? That kind of restating, again, it's repetition, which is great. Using different words, different sentence structures, different vocabulary, all to explain the same concept helps get that information in. Excuse me. The reasoning, agree and disagree, always takes the conversation a little further. And this comes with some discussion beforehand with the class about expectations and relationships and community, where we say, we're allowed to disagree in this class. We agree with each other sometimes, we disagree with each other sometimes, but there are polite ways to do that. And then we can do some modeling. This is definitely a great language builder, because when you disagree, sometimes a newer English learner doesn't have a wide variety of ways to say they don't like something or they disagree. So you really have to teach the language of how to do that. Some students, even native English speakers, don't necessarily know how to say that in a calm, polite, productive way. And we need to coach them on that. So we practice agreeing and disagreeing over whatever things come up in the classroom that aren't too heated, that we can do, maybe be a little silly, and that becomes part of it. Asking someone to add on. This is great for the critical thinking side, because we're asking them to extend their thinking. It's great from the language development side, because we're trying to pull more language out of students. So if someone answers your question with like a proficiency level 2 type response, like a little short sentence or something kind of choppy, would you like to add on to that? Give the student the option first. Would someone else like to add on to that? And hopefully you can get a student who will then give you like a proficiency level 3 response with maybe a couple sentences. Maybe you can get someone who can give you a couple complex sentences when they add on. So not only are they adding more critical thinking, but they're adding more language, and they're modeling that as well. And then if I get one of those higher level answers and I'm super excited by whoever said that, then I can go back to repeating, like, oh, that was awesome. Can someone restate what they just said? And then you're getting students to take that leap and try a higher level of academic language. Wait time, age-old wait time. Something you probably learned about in all of your new teacher courses as you were taking them, or any professional development you've had. And just the caveat being that for English learners, it is extremely important, because there's so much processing going on in here. With you're taking the math, you're putting it in your language, you're bringing it back to English, you're trying to get the words together. We just need to patiently wait a little bit and give them time to do that. I think that's also good when you do everybody think and you time it and you count it. It feels painful sometimes, but it's time that will help your English learners get their thoughts together and respect that, as someone said earlier, they really might know, but it just goes by too fast and they don't get a chance to share that. So turn and talk, we've talked about that a little bit already, but again, using these kinds of strategies to pull more language, to pull more math thinking out of students, and then to turn them to each other and let them talk about it. And again, reinforce once you've taught the talk moves and you've practiced them, that if they're using them within their small groups or their partner talk, that you really praise and get excited about that for them. One way that I love getting into encouraging that academic language and math talk in the classroom is with simple bags of Legos. So you can have the little Legos, the bigger Legos, anything that doesn't have to be Legos, but something buildable. We've also done like those sets of gears that you can put together or anything you can build with. And what we do is, whether it be a class jar or a jar on the table, in the good old days where students could sit at the tables and talk to each other, someday we'll be back there. You might have a jar on the table, a cup on the table, a class jar. And as we use a talk move, if I'm the one in front of the class and we have a class jar, I would say, like, have a little math discussion and then say, okay, let's think about what we just said. Does anyone remember hearing me use a talk move? Which talk moves did you notice that I used? And if they can identify when something happened, then we put a Lego in the jar, right? That's our class jar. If we have cups or jars or whatever on the tables or in partners, and I hear students using the talk moves in their conversations, then I go around, like any typical behavior management strategy, go around and put Legos in their jars. And then at a certain point, once we've built up enough Legos, then the groups get a few minutes to build whatever they want to build their Legos into, and then they can share those with the class. So just a fun incentive. And it gets into also, when we get into more, I would say, higher level classroom conversations about math, once we've done a lot of math talk and we're ready to move into higher level discussions of academic language and math, the Lego idea builds us into another set of strategies called constructive conversations by Jeff Sweers, Z-W-I-E-R-S. Anything Jeff Sweers is gold. He focuses on interaction and academic language, mostly in math. And so this is kind of the warm up for moving up to those more advanced levels of academic discourse as we go. So we've talked about some interaction ideas. Now let's take a look at comprehensibility. Just a couple ideas of strategies here. I love a good anchor chart in math. So I just picked one off the internet. You can think of pros and cons for how it's put together. But let me explain to you the things that I like about this one. I'm not saying it's perfect in any way, but we can talk about what I like and what might be missing. So an anchor chart in math, when we're talking about language in math, it's the perfect place to mesh those together. Your anchor charts in math, I want to see vocabulary. We talked about how important that was. And I want to see, like this one has, we talked about how hard it was for students to talk about the math. So here, this is giving students a couple of sentences that they can use as models. And it's also doing some teaching. It has the visuals for comprehensibility. So when you're thinking about anchor charts in math, it's a great tool. to record as you teach. And it's a wonderful tool to have in the classroom for students to refer back to as they are working in small groups or independently. So as I was saying with the anchor chart, here's my more official version of what that is. We start any instruction and our anchor charts with a solid foundation of word knowledge. That means we're starting with the vocabulary. Here are the words I should hear floating around this classroom while we're talking about fractions, right? And that becomes part of our anchor chart. What we often miss, we kind of leave it there. We label things, we make it beautiful, we have great pictures, is taking that next step. So these are the pillars through the middle that hold up the academic discourse. We can't have a good math conversation. We can't get to academic discourse in math with just vocabulary. We need the structures. We need to know what kinds of sentences you use in math. What are we comparing and contrasting? Are we doing greater or less? Are we doing sequencing, putting steps in order? We have to really think about what language we want to hear students using in their explanations, what language we want to see in their written responses, and back map that and make sure that we are not just teaching the math, but teaching the vocabulary foundation and those structures that can hold up a good academic conversation. So that's why I like this kind of Greek looking visual here. So here's a simple example. It is a 2-chart anchor chart because they used lots of space for big visuals here. But you see, we have comprehensibility, we have pictures, we have labels. Hopefully you're building this together in your class as an interactive. Maybe the students are adding the images or the students are helping to write the words. If you make it, it's a good resource. If you make it with the students being engaged and contributing, then it's their resource. Makes a world of difference in whether they use it or not. And then they remember the conversation that went around the time that Sally had to walk up front, and they remember because, I don't know, her shoe wasn't tied or something, and so they remember what symmetry is. That's how students' minds work in all over the place with their memories. So all those things contribute to them remembering the math. So we have the visuals, we have the labels. They started to add some, then we're moving up in that Coliseum type picture. Here are the columns. These are the kinds of structures. This is what I want to hear in the conversation. I can model it. The students will use this to get their first ideas going, and then hopefully they can add on, they can restate. We bring in our math talk moves, and we continue the conversation. This is a simple level of that idea of how to keep building that triangle, the 3 principles, into your math. So here's an example of a little higher level and the process I would go through with students. So step by step, we are going to talk about unit rates. And unit rates, ratios, when we talk about you'll use this when you're an adult and everybody's like, I'm never going to use this, but you will use this because you need to be a good shopper and we need to find out what's the better deal, what's the better bargain. So Tide has laundry pods, $21.44 for 96 loads of laundry. 96 packs, you use 1 in each load. You can do 96 loads of laundry. All has a container where you can get 60 packs for $9.89. Now, when they use different sizes, how do we ever know what's the better bargain? And so this is how we're getting students engaged. First, it's real life, something they can relate to. You can bring them in, just don't leave them unattended. We've all heard about the Tide Pod incidents going on. When we're talking about how to solve problems, this is a typical anchor chart I'd see in a math classroom, real life unit rates. Very nice. There's a visual, real life visual there with a coupon or something from an ad, and it goes step by step. Very simple, not a lot of language, demonstrating, right? Very strong model chart here. Now, here's what I want to do on top of that. A lot of times we leave it there when we're the math teacher and the students use this as a model and they can solve. And they probably can get started on that. But I want to make it even better because not only do I want them to be able to do the math, I want them to be able to talk about the math and justify their math. So we're going to start with what key vocabulary students will need to comprehend and calculate and then report back on a unit rate problem. And I would have that conversation with the class. So like, okay, so if this is our model, what words am I looking for? Because by now they know I'm obsessed with, what words do I want to hear when you're talking with your partner? What words do I want to hear when you're talking about unit rates and you're solving the unit rate? Then we'll get into what sentence structures and language, those columns there that they will need. Right? They need additional supports to be able to do this really well and use their academic language. So model support. This is how it goes. Now I would do this with them, but for our time's sake, we're going to just have it ready for him. I would do this with them interactively so they remember the conversation. But at the top of my chart, key vocabulary. These are the words and terms I should hear over and over in your conversation. Let's make sure everybody understands what they are before we get started. Then I'm modeling how to speak and then at the same time how to write what I'm doing. So this goes with the step-by-step that's already there. To find the unit rate of tide, first I, then I for the last step. So this is really building language. I'm writing this out. Students are reading, they're repeating. If I go back, like, let me read that to myself again, make sure that makes sense. Like you're modeling good reader strategies, language happening over and over. Then I have a model. And that's, I have other people read it with a partner. Do you have any questions? All those good strategies. Then it's time, we solve the tide problem. Now I want you to work with a partner and solve the unit rate for all. First, we have to figure out what it costs per pod for tide. Now you and your partner are going to figure out the unit rate for tide. And I take my model and turn it into more of a frame. Now, in this version of a frame, this is more of a lower English proficiency version or a lower comprehension level where I give a lot of information and they're just filling in the key pieces. But I know they can have a good conversation because I'm saying, when I walk around and listen in your group, I want to hear you say to find the unit rate of, well, that would be all. I would tell them to use all instead of tide. One thing you can add into that type of work is Jeff Swears again. I already told you he's my favorite. This is a strategy of his, the Math Paired Conversation Protocol. And we're going to go through this very quickly, but this is the PDF that you'll be able to download with the video and the slides. So you'll get a copy of this, don't worry. In the Math Paired Conversation Protocol, you have to practice this. We do it a lot whole group first, and then let them be free in partners to do this. So it takes us step by step. I love protocol. Step by step, we do it the same way all the time. Everybody knows what to do once we've practiced. The first thing you do, you are going to solve the unit rate for the all detergent pots. The first thing you do is work with your partner. You talk to each other. I often add visuals in with this, little people talking so they get that they talk in this part. No pencils, no problem solving, no math. Talk to each other. What is that problem saying? And what is it asking you to do? Talk to your partner, right? Have them come up with some ideas. Now, independently, partner A, partner B, zip and think. I want you to come up with an estimate. Again, no pencils, no paper, no writing down math. Think of a logical estimate. Give them a few minutes of think time. All right, partner A, you share yours. Then partner B, you share yours. We check the talk box. We did that. Now it's time to pick up your pencils, partner A and partner B. And you are going to try to solve this using the model, using the practice that we did on your own. Now, whether you do it on your own or as partners, depends on where you are in the process. If it's the first time they've done this type of problem, I probably keep them in partners. If they've done this a lot of times, then have them do it on their own and compare. The idea of this is there's more than one way to solve problems. And so we are going to independently work this out, and then we're going to come back together and share. So then partner A will say, where it says there, justify your method. What did you do and why did you choose to do it that way? Okay, now partner B, you tell partner A what you did and why you chose to do it that way. There's no evaluation here. There's no agree or disagree, just sharing. When partner A is talking, partner B is just listening, right? Take some practice and monitoring. Right, then you go back to your recording. If you want to draw out, model, show, whatever it is you have to do to show your work. And again, then you'll share with your partner. You'll talk about what you did. The next step is you're going to compare that back to what your estimates were and talk about, were you close, were you not close, why? So there's a little bit of math and there's a lot of conversation about math. So even though we are really only solving one problem in this class period, they are doing so much thinking about processes and critical thinking that it really pays off. All right, the last couple steps of this process we do in class. Now you can have a conversation. Now we're going to talk about the pros and cons of the different methods. Now you get to argue, not argue, justify, argue, politely agree and disagree. Even if both methods came up with the correct answer, one is probably faster, easier, more efficient, better in some way. So talk together and decide which one that is, right? Then I want you to talk about how your two methods were similar. Well, maybe we both used division, or we both drew it first, or we both, whatever it is that they did that was similar. And then at the end, they're going to write their explanation of how to solve this type of problem. That's putting all of the language together. That's taking that whole structure, the foundation, the pillars, and the academic discourse and putting it together. And the last step would be then they can create a problem, and tomorrow maybe we're exchanging and sharing problems that they made up. So when we get to this part here with create a final explanation, I may need to put a support back up. I could use this other one that was super supportive. If I feel like they need a lot of structure, I probably have students who can do it with just a little bit of guidance. So I just put up make sure they have these key pieces of information. If you're the ESL teacher, you are really focused on that sequencing. You're focused on getting the details in there. You're focusing on taking what we have at the top and turning it into past tense because they're talking about what they did. So it would be divided and labeled. So there's a lot of things you can be doing from the language side, as well as supporting the conversation and getting that oral language going. So that is my super speed version of a couple ways that you can get more language development into your math lessons and really give a lot of support to students who are just struggling to express their thinking, or they need more support in getting the concepts and practicing the concepts, because now you've given them the language they needed to do that. I wanted to just share with you that these ideas and many, many more strategies and more examples where I go a lot slower and give more in-depth explanations and handouts are in our Language and Math Pathway. The first 2 courses will start again on June 21st, and then the final course in the pathway is brand new, and that'll be starting in July. So you could finish the whole pathway by the end of the summer. Digging into the language of math, we get started on the basics. We spend a lot more time on that 3 principles on the triangle, on building strong interaction, more strategies there. Thinking and speaking math, we get into that paired conversation protocol and other higher level speaking and critical thinking activities. And then we take that even further with the advanced strategies. So something to consider. Now we have a little bit of time. If you have any questions, feel free to pop them in the chat box. Again, for those who are on that hour timeline that I promised before you have to go, just want to remind those who may have signed in after we talked about it that recording of this session will be available later this evening or no later than tomorrow morning if the upload internet gods are working in my favor. And then I will include the paired conversation protocol handout and the PDF of the slides, so you can share with friends and think of the questions you have. If you want to email questions that come to mind later when you try some of these, you can reach me at info@englishlearnerportal.com. So it would be the email that you got the announcements from and such. You can just email back to that. That will come to me, and I can answer questions down the road. So let's see what questions you have in the box. How can we maintain grade level goals in critical thinking when students have incurred such big gaps, such as sight students? So the level of thinking is not necessarily tied to the level of math achievement. So this is a little hard to sort out in a very quick time. So let's say I might not know how to multiply because I didn't get that when I didn't go to school, or I didn't get that in school, or it didn't stick. For whatever reason, I don't know my multiplication facts. And now you're asking me to do division and unit rates. So as the teacher, all of that conversation we're having, I know that I need to fill in some gaps as we go. So we're still working on the grade level standard, but I might need to pull some students aside. I might need to put, if I am lucky enough to have that second pair of hands, I might have the ESL teacher managing the conversations, because that's language development, absolutely your job. And the math teacher, I'm going to go to those that I know are going to struggle, and maybe I'm giving them a calculator, maybe they're using a multiplication chart, maybe there are other supports that they need. You may not always be able to keep it at that grade level standard when you're talking about interrupted education. I mean, significantly. When you have those high school students who have second grade education, sometimes that's tough. But remember that even if you're teaching them how to add, you can get the critical thinking up there by doing problem solving, by asking them age appropriate, real life math scenarios. They know how to survive in the world. They know about paychecks. They know about how much things cost in the store. You can relate things back in that way. So it's not babyfying, making something, is that a word? Making something babyish. It's really respecting the critical thinking level and age appropriate respect, even if you have to dip back with the math concepts. I hope that makes sense. It's a little hard to explain without getting students in front of me. What about visual models and conceptual understanding? What is better, visual models or focusing on step-by-step process? Both, right? Again, you never know what is going to click. In general, English learners tend to be more visual learners because that's a survival method. In some cases, I mean, some students are just naturally more visual learners. But many times it's just from functioning in a second language world, you learn to rely more on your visual strategies, just like a blind person would learn to work more with their listening skills. Visual models, anytime you can show, draw, write out, model, create, that's a major plus, because the students who are not understanding what you're saying can at least follow. And they can pick up words here and there. And that's why if you use that, they need to hear it, they need to see it, they need to say it. You stop every so often and just stop and say, this is a fraction. What is it? It's a fraction. Write the word fraction. Like quick little 2-second thing. All of that will really pay off. Step-by-step process, I would do after the fact. I would do the visual modeling first, the real hands-on, this is exactly how I do it. And then I would create some kind of model to write through step-by-step what we did. There was a year where I was co-teaching with an algebra teacher because I was the newcomer center teacher for 9th graders at the high school. And I would go to algebra with them. And at first I thought, whose idea was this? Like, this is not going to be, well, first, whose idea was it to put me in algebra? Because I was not the best math student myself. And now you're putting me in algebra with people who haven't been in school since 3rd grade. This ought to be awesome. It was amazing. I learned a lot of algebra. I learned how to take better notes. I modeled how to take notes, how to set up their notebook. And then I needed it for me because just seeing it happen really helped. But then as the math teacher was modeling it, as the ESL teacher, I had the chart paper and I was writing down what she was doing. And then I would take that and add supports in, like draw little pictures, you know, circle the key vocabulary words, maybe give a little example, you know, things like that, so that that process has a permanent place on an anchor chart where after the modeling is over, I can picture the modeling in my head as I read through that chart because they were created simultaneously, right? I hope that gives you some ideas there. Step-by-step really helps because if it's written down, because as you're going step-by-step, you have to remember that beginning English speakers are missing maybe 2/3 of the words that are coming out of you. So even your best modeling, they're still missing chunks of what's important. And so that step-by-step will also help reinforce and give them a second way of getting. All right, whoop, going crazy with the scrolling here. Any other questions before we go? All right, I know that was super fast. If you have questions, once you have a chance to process it all, that come to you later. Again, I'll put my email here in the chat box, though I'm sure you can find it in your inbox. It's info@englishlearnerportal.com. And if you go to www.englishlearnerportal.com, at the top in the header, click on webinars, and you'll see later tonight, That registration page will turn into a replay page, and you'll be able to find the recording and the handouts from this evening. When that's up and ready, I will send out an email. If for some reason your system blocks the email, happens to us a lot because we have over 500 people registered tonight, so it starts to think we're spam when we send 500 emails. If it gets stuck in your spam, just know that you can go to the website under webinars and find it there. So again, thank you for giving up an hour of your evening. We have another webinar coming up on May 18th. That'll be about students with interrupted education. So those of you who were asking those questions, we can make connections there. That will be May 18th at 8:00 p.m. Eastern Time. That will be about the education of students with interrupted education. Again, on that webinar link on the website, you can register for that one. And then we will have another one on May 26th about working with unaccompanied minors. Big topic right now with, 17,000 growing number of students at the border who we know in time are making their way to us. So on May 26th, webinar with our social worker, Laura Gardner, who will talk about how to support those unaccompanied minors that we already have and those who will be coming. So again, go to the website, you can register for that. There'll also be follow-up emails to remind you about those. So I hope to see you again in another webinar or in the Language and Math Pathway courses. If you have any questions, please let us know and enjoy the rest of your evening. Good night.